welcome to this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are here to break down all things college basketball. We are through the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. There is a lot to talk about. We'll walk through some of the results, some of the storylines that have developed over the past week here in this first segment. Then in the second segment, we are going to take a break from NCAA tournament talk. We're going to walk through the coaching carousel, all of the jobs that have been filled to this point, the ones that we are still keeping an eye on. We'll walk through some of the grades that I have given out at On3. You can keep up with all of that work. I've got bracket picks out for this upcoming slate, which will be the focus of our third segment. We'll walk you through a preview of the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 matchups there. So, a big episode, a lot to discuss. Let's go ahead. Let's get into it quickly here. Talking about the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament, March Madness, what we all look forward to throughout the year. We wait every year for this to come up. We fill out our brackets and we watch them fall apart. This year, though, a little bit chalkier than we are used to seeing. Had a good weekend in my bracket picks. I know some people had really good weekends. Some did not hit on their upsets. Frustration there. But as we go through, we do end up with all of the 1 seeds making it to the round of 16 here. So a little bit chalky up top. We end up with all but one of the 2 seeds advancing, and that is where we will head first, where Arkansas upsets St. John's. I think that was one of the biggest upset wins of the weekend. Of course, Arkansas being the only double-digit seed to make it through to the Sweet 16 this year. And so Cinderella story and John Calipari doesn't exactly go together, but that might be the closest thing we have to it in this year's tournament. Arkansas is a team that I picked against in the first round. I had Kansas advancing to face off against St. John's in that game, but when it came down to it, when they tipped off, an incredible performance by Arkansas. They got the best of Jonas Adu, who comes in, transfer from Tennessee, did not have a consistent dominant season that some would have expected when he arrived as one of the new Razorbacks, but this was everything that he could be over this past weekend. Great interior scoring, an impact defensively on the interior, rebounding was at its peak. So this is the player that Arkansas needs if they are going to make the kind of noise that we expected in the preseason. Don't forget, this is a team that at times in the preseason was top 20, top 15 even. So an Arkansas team that gets Jonas Adu at full force and gets Boogie Flan back. And now in my analysis of Arkansas against Kansas, when we were breaking that one down, I cited the Boogie Flan return as a potential negative for Arkansas. And while the result ended up that Boogie Flan was a clear plus for this team, an obvious addition, I stand by the analysis of early in the season, John L. Davis and Boogie Flan not finding that chemistry that they seem to mesh much better this time around. And I think that part of it potentially is that rather than having 2 guys try to find their place in the pecking order, Davis was an established part of this team. He knew his role now, and that was what he struggled with so much early on. So Fland is now, instead of jockeying side by side with someone for touches, is falling into the role that is left beside John L. Davis. That obviously plays a big role. You also got from a couple of your other freshmen, particularly Carter Knox and Billy Richmond Jr., the growth throughout the season. It was on full display. Billy Richmond Jr., the stats were not outstanding, but he played a big role. He was a great kind of piece out there to fill in whatever hole was needed to be filled there. Carter Knox continues to develop. I think he's going to be, if he returns to college basketball next season, he could be one of the best players that we have out there on the wing, because his ability to score, his ability to make an impact now that he has started to settle, that he has started to figure things out, is on full display for sure at times. And so for Arkansas, the pieces all started to mesh together. And another piece of that backcourt was the absence of a Dutiero, which of course has been their best player to this point in the season. And I think, again, to the injury return drama, it is easier for Flan to come in and fill the empty role when there is now a larger role that was being filled and is now vacant. He can come in and sort of find those little gaps, start to fill in for Adu rather than trying to compete with Davis, as we discussed just a moment ago. So a lot of things just ended up falling perfectly into place for this Arkansas team. They end up advancing past Kansas, a Kansas team that, yes, started preseason number one, but has had flaws throughout the year. It has been clear that this was not the best Bill Self roster. There were a lot of holes in the way that it was constructed, a lot of holes in the sort of construction, not just from a positional standpoint, right? They had a point guard, they had a center, they had the wing players, but in terms of the fit, the gel together. And that's, of course, what the concern was with Arkansas, was adding new players into something that had gelled. This Kansas team never did gel. It just never got figured out. The pecking order was always in question. Each night it felt like you might get Hunter Dickinson trying to control the game down the stretch. Perhaps Zeke Mayo. It could be AJ Storr, who was trying to make his mark on the game if he was not off the floor, despite being one of the most coveted players of the past offseason. So that Kansas team just could not get things figured out. We then look, they are out in the first round. So it's time for Kansas to look in the mirror. Of course, Darren Peterson coming in next season. They will surround him with great talent, I'm sure, in the transfer portal, but it's going to take a shift in the way that they view these prospects, in the way that they scout, in the way that they piece together a roster. This is not a new thing for Kansas. This has been a couple of years in the making, that they don't seem to get the right balance of role players, stars, and pieces that fit into the roster. So can they do that this offseason? They have the star piece in place, we think, with that freshman class incoming, but they lose a lot, whether it's outgoing seniors or potential transfer portal entries. So that's kind of that side of the bracket. Of course, St. John's, the lack of shooting came back to get them. Somewhat controversial when Rick Pitino decides to go away from RJ Lewis down the stretch. Clearly, and he made this very clear in the postgame, he had his reason. It was very clear to RJ Lewis why he was not on the floor. So I'm not going to question it, because if the player and coach are in understanding, if it has been clearly communicated to that player, he knows why he's not on the floor, then ultimately it's just the coach's decision. And you can agree with it, disagree with it, whatever the case is. There was an understanding of what was going to go on. And when RJ Lewis did not live up to whatever it was that Rick Pitino was asking from him, that is when he exited the game. So their run comes up short. They had a lot of potential, yes, to make a deep run, but the shooting, it just came back to bite them in that matchup. We look elsewhere around, and I think Bennett Sturts, yes, was a big storyline. He had a big showing for Drake in both rounds here. Of course, got the win, the upset over Missouri in the first round. Was not able to knock off Texas Tech in that second round. Colorado State beats Memphis in a game that went a lot like you would have predicted. Memphis down so many players and really just relying on two guys to carry the load. One of them has an off night, has one of his rare bad performances of the season in PJ Haggerty, an All-American who just did not have it on that given night. And so it was Dane Danger trying to carry them all the way through the finish line. He ran out of gas down the stretch. So Neat Clifford and Colorado State come out on top there. And then lose at the buzzer on a Derek Queen March Madness moment. The first one that we got all weekend, it came in that second round. So Derek Queen, look, we're not going to get too deep into the travel, no travel discussion here, but it was the biggest moment of March to this point. There is no question there. And as a guy who is a projected NBA lottery pick, it can also be big for him. We know guys on draft radars, the more attention you can draw to your performance, the better off you are in March. We go across the rest of the bracket here, and I think if we go here, and we've now talked about the West, of course, Florida challenged by UConn but survives. I think that the chalk of the South kind of took it out of the conversation for most of the weekend. Yes, Auburn did what we expected. They survived in those first couple of games. They now look to be back on track. I like them. We'll talk about that in the third segment. You look at Michigan State advancing past New Mexico. New Mexico, a seed line upset against Marquette. Not a lot to write home about, though, in terms of big breaking news from the weekend. Ole Miss over Iowa State, I do view as an upset, but Iowa State, of course, down players. They had injury problems down the stretch, so I don't think it had the kind of shock, the type of storyline that we would have gotten if that Iowa State team had been 100% and we got this result. It is worth noting, though, that Chris Beard now has Ole Miss in the Sweet 16. That is something that deserves acknowledgement. He takes over this program after, of course, an ugly exit mid-season from Texas, had legal troubles there. Of course, Ole Miss made a decision to hire him. They were asked at length about that decision. He was asked at length about that decision, and they have stood by the decision to hire him, to back him with resources. He has been able to build the roster out, and he is on his way to making Ole Miss a perennial NCAA tournament team that you have to worry about making these type of deep runs. As long as he is there, they will have success, and we will see if and when another big team is ready to take a shot with Chris Beard. We've seen guys get second shots now. That's been a trend, especially in this coaching cycle. So how does that continue? Will he, with his legal troubles, what he has dealt with in the past, will that be his story? Only time will tell. There. We look on the other side of the bracket, and I think, again, it was a little bit chalky. You get Duke advancing through, no real concerns. We find out that Cooper Flagg is healthy. Yes, you get BYU advancing past Wisconsin. That was a quadrant that I was looking very closely at. This BYU VCU game, I've been clear. I thought that both of those were excellent candidates to move through to the next round, but they end up facing each other here, and so you've got to pick one. And BYU just had a little bit more balanced team there. They've of course created kind of a backing now, I think, entering the Sweet 16. It's interesting to watch this BYU team sort of become one of the fan favorites, I feel like, from the reaction that I've seen. They've got Richie Saunders, who of course has the incredible tater tot story that has been told over and over every time that BYU is on TV now. You've got Yegor Dimon, so you have an NBA draft prospect who you can go out and watch, that you can root for, that you can scout and look at as a potential star at the next level. And then you've got this group of guys who is kind of part of the program, who has stuck through and remained when Kevin Young took over. Some of them entered the transfer portal. Some of them were very close to transferring to Kentucky, but end up staying put where they were. And that has been, I know, commended, and it should be, I think. But I would stop short of some of the praise that has been out there. BYU is at the top when we look at teams that have resources to keep players in place, to go and get new players. If you need evidence of that, go look at where AJ Debinsa, the number one player in the country next year, is committed to play. Go look at the reporting on how much he is going to receive to play one season at BYU. So I don't know how much of a darling story this is, but in the absence of a Cinderella team, I can see where that breaks through. Alabama survives. They will take on BYU here in the Sweet 16. And then we move into the Midwest, where it went full chalk into the Sweet 16. We have 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and good storylines that we will talk about later. But in those opening rounds, The only upset that we got was McNeese over Clemson. And this was one that was very popular going into the weekend, but then Will Wade is announced early, or at least reported early, that he will be on his way to NC State after the NCAA tournament run. And I think a lot of people got spooked. A lot of people started to think maybe he would not be so focused on the matchup. Maybe the players would not be so focused on the matchup. That never could have been further from the truth. Look, just because it has not been reported that he was taking the job, if that report had come out 48 hours later, it would not have changed anything. He knew where he stood in negotiations with NC State. He has said multiple times over the last week that he was very upfront with his players about where things stood in his negotiations with NC State, where things stood with them as it related to their future, whether that meant entering the transfer portal after the NCAA tournament or sticking around for another year, following him perhaps to NC State. All of that was an open conversation between him and the players. And so there was no shock value to the news coming out. There is no negative side effect of it. The only thing that it presented was an opportunity for Will Wade to go out with this lasting memory, a chance for Will Wade to make one more big statement before sitting down for the final negotiations, to perhaps give himself another kind of notch on the belt to point to when you're talking numbers. And for the players, it's one more audition. If your plan is to enter the transfer portal, you want to have the biggest stage possible. Pulling off an upset over Clemson, it gives you that. So I thought that it was actually a perfect setup for NC State to then get that upset win, which they did, and then they lose in the next round to Purdue. So we go back to chalk across the board there. The other storyline, and I saved it. Yes, we went through the West region earlier, but I wanted to save this storyline, and then we'll get into the big overarching storyline because they're the two biggest. So I wanted to give them a little bit more time, a little bit more focus at this point in the show. And so we will start with the Dan Hurley controversy. A video comes out of him cursing his way down the tunnel, speaking to some members of the Baylor team, of the staff, whoever he saw when he was walking by, and essentially accusing the refs of crooked calls towards Florida, hoping that Baylor doesn't get the same kind of bad whistle, that the refs don't screw them over and knock them out of the tournament. And it's a bad look. There's no question about it. But I also don't think that many people who saw that and have any perception of who Dan Hurley is or what Dan Hurley has done in the past, this season, seasons previous, throughout his career, I don't think many people were surprised by it. Yes, this is a guy who has known for his temper, for technical fouls, for rants, for all kinds of things. Winning is, yes, at the top of his resume now, thanks to the back-to-back national championships that they won over the past 2 seasons. Before that, it was the outbursts. That was the headline for Dan Hurley. And so for that video to get out, yes, it was a bad look. It wasn't that surprising, though. And so I think that it became this viral video which gets spread, which so many do these days. But I don't think it changed the perception. And you even saw that on a lot of different talk shows over the next day, as they not necessarily defended Dan Hurley, but pointed to this is who he is. That's what you heard over and over again for 24 hours. This is who he is. So there was almost an built-in excuse for why we're seeing this video. And no one was surprised to see it. And nobody particularly reacted that negative to it. Because if you were going to react negative to it, you already had a negative perception of who he is. You didn't like him already. So nothing changed because of this video that was out. It's also not a particularly harmful dialogue or monologue because we don't hear any response there. Every coach that loses, probably, especially with those kinds of stakes, especially when you were leading late, feels like they got screwed. I don't think he was. I didn't see any kind of crooked calls. And look, here's the other thing. I've talked to a couple of Florida fans over the past few days who felt like they got the bad whistle. That's just how it goes. When you're involved, when you're invested in one side, every whistle against you was a bad one. Every result that ends up going against you means that something went wrong. And I didn't view it that way. So I don't think he particularly has a case here, but I also don't think it did a lot of harm. I think many, many coaches have something similar to that moment, whether it's in the locker room, closed to the media, or on the bus home, or on the phone with their friends and family, wherever it is, on the team plane. I think this happens a lot. So I wasn't particularly freaked out about it. But then we get reports that the SID at UConn fires back at the reporter who shot the video and reportedly, allegedly, threatened to ruin his life if he posted the video. And then puts out a statement saying that the reason for having that, quote, moment of weakness was that in his mind, the lasting images of Dan Hurley should have been of him consoling his players and having the emotional moment with his team. And perhaps that's true, especially if you're invested in the PR of Dan Hurley and the UConn Huskies, which the SID is. Obviously, that is the perception, that is the image that he wants out there. But this image that's out there, this video, it doesn't change how anyone views him. So to publicly go to bat to try to fight against this, to try to kill this narrative and make sure it never sees the light of day, just doesn't seem like a worthwhile investment of time and resources and energy, and it can only backfire. Because, of course, the reporter then has even more reason to post it. Because now there's a second story to follow it. There is a second story that now he is under attack as you try to censor him. And now the SID claims that he was in an area he wasn't supposed to be in. Okay. But look at the news cycle nowadays. It's not like we only get video proof of things from reporters. How many people were in that tunnel? You're telling me not one camera could have been on, and that video could not have gotten to TMZ or even to those reporters who were standing just feet away. Multiple other people are cited as having heard the interactions. So even if he was not in the exact position he was supposed to be in, that doesn't change what happened or the validity of it being out there. And so, of course, since the statement has been deleted, the response, and it's just been a bad PR week for UConn. And it didn't have to be. I don't think that there was any particularly bad PR. I think that we all looked at those images and said, this is Dan Hurley. Being emotional over his players, that is Dan Hurley. And cussing out the refs is also Dan Hurley. We all knew that. To create this other storyline just seems like it only can hurt UConn. But here we are. And where we are, as we wrap up this first segment, with the big overarching storyline, with the big topic of the weekend, is a chalky Sweet 16. And there has been a dialogue, and it has started, and it has gone around, and you see it all over the internet. And once someone says it, then it picks up steam. And then you see it on talk shows, you see it all over the internet, that apparently the NCAA tournament is dying. And so we're supposed to believe that the lack of Cinderella teams in this year's tournament means that the sport is dead. They have pronounced it dead fully. Cinderella is dead. College basketball is dead. Time to pack it up. Except that we saw the highest TV ratings in 3 decades. So, not sure where the correlation there is. See, this is where we get into an issue between creating a public discourse and actual results. Because, yes, a Cinderella story is fun. We like to talk about it. We didn't have an opening segment today on McNeese or on Drake. We didn't talk at length about a Yale or a UC San Diego because none of them advanced far enough. But if we're trying to put eyes in front of televisions, Michigan and Texas A&M is going to draw a lot more eyes than UC San Diego and Yale. So even though you didn't get that, your ability to hold attention actually survived longer. And I know that's a little bit of a boring storyline because yes, if once your team's out, you do care about some of the other narratives that are going around. Enough to watch, the TV numbers would disagree. But enough to keep track of it, to keep texting your friends about it, to tweet about it, sure. Sure, we can talk about the engagement on that side of things. But here's the deal. Cinderella's not dead. Under no circumstance can we declare that Cinderella stories are over. And this is the public outrage and the outcry every time that the portal and NIL is mentioned. Let me tell you, the transfer portal created parity. At least that's what people were saying last season. When a 14 seed won, when a 15 seed won, when double-digit seeds made it to the Sweet 16, when we have seen Princeton, Oakland, Florida Gulf Coast, St. Peter's, when we have seen all of these teams make these runs through. When I looked, 4 teams seeded either 14th or 15th in their respective region have advanced to the Sweet 16 over just the past few years. We have had 2 16-1 upsets, UMBC and Fairleigh Dickinson, just in the past decade. While all of this was going on, the transfer portal has given those teams as good of a shot as ever to make a deep run. NIL has given those teams an advantage over their peers. Not over the big dogs, but they never had an advantage there. If an SEC school wanted a kid, he was already going to go there. I mean, we forget, we talk about the transfer portal. Kids already were transferring. They just had to sit out a year. And they were plenty willing to do so if it meant that they got to go from playing at this small school to then playing at a big school. So all we did was change this arcane rule that they had to sit out. That was the biggest shift. And yes, NIL dollar numbers might be out of control, quote unquote. But if they're all out of control, then the market never truly changes. Just because now people are spending $8 million instead of $2 million. Well, all of the top teams went from $2 million to $8 million. So the players are the only ones getting more benefit. It's not like the schools are now able to go get 4 times as many players because there's only a finite number of minutes out there on the court. There's only a certain number of points that can be scored. And so it's such a false narrative here that those two things have this drastic impact on the way that the game is played, on the way that it is recruited, on the way that it is evolved. Now, the transfer portal has made college basketball older for sure, especially these top teams. Look at the average age. But you know what did that more than the transfer portal is these eligibility waivers. And we got through all the COVID waivers. This should have been the last year of COVID waivers. But now the NCAA has added junior college waivers. And they're giving out additional fifth year waivers for seniors who have dealt with injuries, who have dealt with coaching change. There's all kinds of waivers out there for so many different things that it's impossible to keep track of what the roster is going to look like next season. That has nothing to do with either of the two things that have been demonized in college sports. That has to do with the NCAA providing inconsistent rulings left and right to players from the very end of the season all the way through the start of the next season. They don't even get all these cases resolved by the time we are playing basketball in November. We had players who had to wait till the middle of the season to find out if they were eligible this season. And that is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. That is what needs to be resolved. There has got to be clear criteria. And that goes for the transfers. That goes for NIL. It goes for the waivers. And here's the deal. I know coaches want to tell you that revenue sharing is going to fix things. And the little secret is they are telling you that because it puts control back in their hands. NIL, yes, you can call it the Wild West. It is a little bit, but it's a free market system. When we go to revenue sharing, it encourages cheating to return. It encourages teams to go outside the boundaries to try to gain advantage. And we know that was happening before. So don't believe every coach who tells you that revenue sharing is going to fix this. It is not going to resolve all of the issues in college sports. If anything, it benefits the teams that have the most resources. It puts them back in position to use those resources discreetly to then create an advantage wherever they can. So there is a lot to unpack in college sports. There is a lot to like, to dislike. But the Cinderella story is not dead. It is around us every year. And just because one season did not have a magical ball does not mean that it is never coming again. Just look at Cinderella. Cinderella story. The Cinderella run. The story of Cinderella is one where reality crashes the fairy tale. The clock strikes midnight. This season, this NCAA tournament, we got a pumpkin. But that does not mean that next year we're not going to get a 13 seed, a 14 seed, a 15 seed, a 16 seed advancing through the field. We are seeing it more often than ever because these players who are not getting playing time on the top teams are now transferring closer to home, where they can get an NIL offer, where they can be around a group of people that they are familiar with. And so it has benefited plenty of these programs to have the transfer portal, to have NIL. It is a completely different landscape. It has changed a lot of things. But change does not necessarily mean better or worse. So as college basketball continues to evolve, keep that in mind and keep following it because the games are still fun. The sport itself is still thriving, and we are seeing great returns in the ratings. When we come back on the other side, we will talk about the coaching carousel right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in as we keep things rolling on today's show. A long one for you here. We have so much to talk about. This is March Madness. This is what we wait for. And we also have some coaching moves to talk about here in this second segment. Now, because this show is kind of a long one, we're going to keep it brief here. We're not going to do a deep dive. We will do that next week in a Tuesday episode. So we will have a coaching carousel special here. Hopefully, we can get these last couple of jobs filled over the course of time. But as we stand here today, I do just want to run through some of the developments that we have gotten. Iowa makes things official with Ben McCullum. Looks like he's going to bring multiple of his players with him from Drake, which is interesting because a lot of them came from Division II to Drake. Now they're going to try their luck in the Big Ten, so we'll see how that plays out for them. A lot of loyalty there in that group. That's been kind of one of the key words that has been thrown around with them. Nico Medved going to take over at Minnesota. He, of course, comes from Colorado State, where he often had his team playing their best basketball entering the month of March. That team has made multiple runs towards the NCAA tournament during his tenure. They have had a surprising, I think, number of pros come out of that school. And so it'll be interesting to see if he can keep up that kind of pipeline at Minnesota. I think that job is one that is very difficult, but if anyone's going to succeed there, it might be Nico Medved. And then we move to NC State, where Will Wade has taken over. We've talked about it a little bit. Will Wade is the home run hire of the cycle. Absolutely knocked it out of the park. This is a guy who, if you look at his results at every stop, if you take out those years in particular where the FBI was investigating him, where there was federal prison time being given out to people who he was in connection with, you take out those years when they were basically buying time until he was given a show cause by the NCAA, and Will Wade has performed far above whatever school he's at's expectations. So we see that continue at McNeese with 2 NCAA tournament appearances. They get an NCAA tournament win with a roster that was far above what you would expect from a Southland Conference team. He now heads to NC State, where it appears he will have some resources behind him, and he is ready to start building things, making a real run at the ACC, which, of course, a conference that is down, a conference that needs teams to step up, to make big investments, and NC State is ready to do so there. Texas brings in Sean Miller. He, of course, takes over for Rodney Terry, who was on the way out. A disappointing tenure there. It's always hard when you're the interim, even when you get the label taken off, particularly when a lot of the high-ranking members there at the school wanted to go a different direction, felt like they had to stick with you because of the results. You're never going to get full credit because it wasn't your roster, but that means, of course, they're all waiting for you to fail so that they can replace you with who they wanted. And who they wanted back then, who they wanted this time around, was Sean Miller. He gets the job. I've seen some conversation from Xavier fans frustrated with him using them as a stepping stone, and I understand as a Big East school having some frustration that you are viewed as a stepping stone. Of course, the first time around, he was in the Atlantic 10 when he was at Xavier, and so he leaves that job for Arizona, and I don't think you can be as upset about that one. This one, again, I get it. You're a Big East school. You don't feel like you should be a stepping stone job. But Texas is among those just top end jobs that everyone wants a shot at. They have the NIL resources, just the cachet of the school, of the program, the recruiting that is around there. It has it all. And so I don't think you can necessarily blame Sean Miller for making that move. Although, again, I always am sensitive to the fan reaction. I always understand that they just have a different view of these things. When it goes against you, you're never quite happy. But Sean Miller to the SEC, it's going to be fun. Not quite sure how it will fit, but again, he's in a great spot there at Texas. We then look at Ryan Odom getting the job at Virginia. He takes over a place where he has some past ties. Of course, he is the coach who won with UMBC against the Cavaliers as the first ever 16-over-1 matchup. So a little bit of fun history there along with it. Virginia, another one of those ACC teams. They are trying to fill that gap and put themselves back in the mix, competing for conference titles. Villanova is the odd man out. They are waiting There are rumors of Kevin Willard and him running down the clock at Maryland, hoping for an extension. What will happen there? We will see. I don't think we can have a firm answer there. And that is one of the results that we are hoping to get resolved before we do a special deep dive on next Tuesday. West Virginia, they also fill their role. Of course, Darian DeVries, he leaves them for Indiana. Frustrating for West Virginia fans, to say the least. You think you've got the guy, you think you have your long term replacement who can lead the program to a long history of success again. And instead, he ends up out after 1 year taking the Indiana job. Again, like the Texas job, it sucks to be used as a stepping stone job, but we're talking about the blue blood kind of jobs here. Obviously, Indiana, a basketball blue blood. Texas, more of a college athletics blue blood. I would describe them that way. They don't necessarily have the rich basketball history, but what they have is an athletic department as a whole that is viewed as one of the best in America. Xavier lands on a fun hire as well. They end up adding Richard Pitino. So he comes in from New Mexico. He will take over that Xavier job, makes the move from the Mountain West to the Big East, where he will compete with his father. That will be a great storyline next season and beyond. Xavier was an interesting job here because, of course, there was the frustration with Sean Miller leaving them for a second time. Chris Mack was rumored to be in the mix, but then does not end up getting it. He would have been on his second tenure as the Xavier coach. So you wonder how much that played a role, not wanting a repeat performance there. But Richard Pitino gets his second shot at the high major level. Of course, I have never looked at his Minnesota tenure as a failure. I was a little bit confused by the move to move on from him. He goes to New Mexico and he kills it there. And I think I tweeted within the last week actually about him and his position. He should have been one of the most coveted young coaches who could get one of these big jobs, that was ready to coach at the high major level and make a real impact. And he could sort of pick where he wanted to go. He didn't have to go to one of these bad situations like Minnesota was when he was there the first time around. He could afford to wait for a Xavier type situation where he can now have some really good success, make some NCAA tournament runs like he did at New Mexico, and see if he can build that into something even bigger. So those are the hires around. Like I said, we're waiting on Villanova. We hope to get that result in soon. We will have a full coaching carousel breakdown for you on Tuesday. Be on the lookout for that. When we come back on the other side, though, we have to talk about the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. I will be in Atlanta for that. And so we will get you prepared right here on Three True Values. Welcome back in as we wrap up today's show here on Three True Values. We got to break down the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight for you, get you ready for all of these matchups to come. And so let's go ahead and get into it. We'll look in the South region to start. That, of course, will be played in Atlanta on Friday and Sunday. I will be there. I will have live coverage from those games, talk to the coaches, talk to the players afterwards. And we've got two good matchups to follow. We have SEC versus Big Ten, the two conferences that have dominated so far. Auburn against Michigan on the top of the bracket. We talked about Auburn coming into this tournament. We said that it would give us a lot of information how they played in that second round. We expected them to advance through the 1-16 game, but then it would have been Louisville or Creighton. It turns out to be Creighton, and they were challenged. Creighton put up a good fight. I think they have a really good roster there, but Auburn was able to take care of business. I liked what I saw from them. It did show me what I needed to see, what I talked about, where it was going to be a big signal. If they struggled heavily with Creighton, there was going to be a major red flag coming into that Sweet 16 round that they could be on upset alert, because that would have been an extended period of struggling results. And you wouldn't have been able to use the narrative anymore that they were just walking through some pretty meaningless games in the grand scheme of their season. That is not the case anymore. Of course, it is win or go home. On the other side, we have Michigan, who in the first round used their two bigs to just kind of outsize UC San Diego. They were just able to hold on there. And then against Texas A&M, I think again, Texas A&M, a team that wants to get on the boards, wants to get a lot of rebounds. Well, the other team had the two biggest players on the court. I think that advantage probably runs out though against this Auburn team. Auburn has some big players. You have Janai Broome, a top player of the year candidate. And you look at Dylan Cardwell beside him. They also bring some depth off the bench with Chaney Johnson in the mix there with the big rotation as well. So I think that this Auburn team can probably match what they're able to do. You look at having to guard Janai Broome. Which of those two Michigan bigs will take on that task? Which one will guard Dylan Cardwell? And then on the other end, while Danny Wolf is known for playing on that perimeter and being able to draw these mismatches, I'm not sure how much he can do that to the same degree when Janai Broome is also a pretty good defender. He will be in that spot much more comfortably than a lot of the people who have guarded Wolf to this point in the season. And then on the bottom of the bracket, we have got Michigan State and Ole Miss. Michigan State continues to just roll through these games. It feels like even though they don't shoot the ball the best in the country, they aren't the most just dominant lineup of guys. They didn't even get a good Jace Richardson game in this second round, but they get through Bryant. Bryant put up a fight. You know, like I said, I thought they were the low-seeded team that had the best chance, but just wasn't going to happen. That's how it played out. They play a New Mexico team that gave them a real shot. New Mexico gave it everything they had, and Michigan State just survived. They just made enough plays down the stretch to get things done, and without their best player having a big, big performance. So it'll be interesting to see. This Michigan State team is just, there's something about them. They just keep advancing. They keep surviving. And so they're a team to watch because even if the analysis says maybe the other team has the advantage, I wouldn't fully count them out for sure. Ole Miss on the top of this, they of course survived through that bracket, beating North Carolina handily. They kind of made sure that Cinderella story of, first four down through the round of 64, it was not going to continue. North Carolina was not going to continue to make their case of why they belonged in the tournament. Ole Miss put an end to that very early in that first game. Then they face Iowa State, and they take care of business there. They survive. They get through. And this is a team that's going to be hard to pick against, like Michigan State, because they just keep surviving and advancing here. And so I'm going to lean on the higher seeded team. I'm going to lean on the coach who has a long, long track record of March Madness success. Now, Chris Beard has put his teams into some really good positions, especially in his short time that he has had at some of the schools that he's been. But I'm just going to roll with Tom Izzo here, and I think that they also have the best player who could make a difference in Jace Richardson. Even though he didn't in that last game, I think if he comes out and makes a difference, it will be kind of the swing there in Michigan State's favor. So then we have Auburn and Michigan State, and I'm going to lean Auburn because I think that if we can get them back into a dominant state, it will be too much for this Michigan State team. And I think that also, like I said, this Michigan State team is not just clicking on all cylinders. They are not just this perfect team that you look at and you say, wow, the way that they play, they cannot be beat. I don't see that from this group, and so I'm rolling with Auburn there. We'll go down to the West region now, where we've got Florida and Maryland. This is a really fun matchup, I think, because Florida gets tested against UConn, a real test. They had to go down to the wire. They needed Walter Clayton to have a big finish in that game to survive, but they get through. And now I think you look at the depth of that roster. I think that you look at that starting five and you say, it's up there. It might be the best starting five left in college basketball, and they might have the best depth in college basketball right now. But if you were going to put starting fives head to head, you would not get far down the list before Maryland, who, yes, has played two double-digit seeds in Grand Canyon and Colorado State, but neither of those are just walkover games. Colorado State probably underseeded in the mix here. They were one of the hottest teams in the country coming into that matchup fresh off of a win that wasn't even considered an upset. That's how hot they had been, that people were riding with Colorado State over the higher seeded Memphis Of course, yes, injuries played a role in there too, but Maryland gets through on a buzzer beater by Derek Queen. So they have been tested. These are two teams that have faced the brink of elimination here in this NCAA tournament. And so I think it'll be fascinating. I think that when the two starting lineups have so much talent between them, I think that the front court matchup is going to be incredible. Reese and Queen up against Chinyelu, Condon, Hanlogton into the mix as well. I think that that is going to be a really, really fun matchup throughout the course of the game. But I'm going to lean Florida because I think that you get a little bit more depth there. They go a little bit deeper with their talent pool to wear down Maryland. Arkansas and Texas Tech is on the bottom of this bracket. And man, we talk about this Texas Tech team. They survived through to the Sweet 16 despite not having a fully healthy roster. Chance McMillan was out. You also had Darian Williams, who is still returning. He looked good in their last game, but whether he's 100% still at this point is up in the air. They look now, though, to be the favorite to make it through to the Elite Eight. But then there's Arkansas. And here they come, and they're clicking at the right time. They take down Kansas. They take down St. John's. And John Calipari is starting to beat his chest a little bit, and he knows he's starting to see some things from this team that suggest they could go a long way. They get Adutiero back, and they get him integrated into this mix. If you can get Fland, Davis, and Tiero going at full force with Adu also clicking the best that we have seen him all season, watch out. I'm going to ride with this Arkansas team. I think they're getting hot at the right time, and I think that they have found some formula here that if you can add Tiero in, and I don't think that Tiero is the type of player who limits you. I think he is the kind of guy who you can plug in midway through an NCAA tournament run and have success. So I'm going to rely on this. I think that they've got this right formula to make it to the Elite Eight and face off against Florida, where I just think that Florida is going to overwhelm them. I think Florida is that good. I think that Florida has proven it over the course of the SEC schedule that they are a cut above this little tier that Arkansas was in among SEC teams. So I will roll with Florida over Arkansas to make the Final Four. So that'd be Auburn and Florida through to the Final Four at this point. That'd be the current projections that I have. That is also what I had in my first bracket to start the NCAA tournament. On to the East region. We have moved to the right side of the bracket where Duke plays Arizona, and this is going to be a fun storyline game because we've got Caleb Love facing off against Duke one more time in his college career. He's 5-4 all time against the Blue Devils. Of course, he's had some of the biggest moments in college basketball. I said it last week in an appearance. I feel like this guy is always taking big shots. He's going to make some. He's going to miss some. It feels like he's always going to get some kind of buzzer beater. And I don't know if it's going to go in, but I know that he's going to have to take one at some point. And what better matchup for him to have than Duke? He is the one who sent Coach K into retirement, who ended Paolo Banchero's freshman season. This is a guy who cherishes facing off against Duke. And yes, he's at Arizona now, but still making some references to that rivalry over the past week or so as people have kind of anticipated Duke and Arizona matching up here. Caleb Love is going to be the player to watch there. And can he send Cooper Flagg home? Can he end his college basketball career? That's going to be the storyline going into that one for sure. I'm still riding with Duke, though. I think they just have too much. They look like they're healthy. We're, of course, waiting on firm news on Malik Brown. I would not bank on him playing that first game, but I still think that they are good enough to advance there. Alabama and BYU on the bottom of this bracket, and it'll be a fun one because these are two teams that want to get out and play some offense. This is going to be a high-scoring affair here. The key, I think, is that Alabama has the higher defensive ceiling. I think that Alabama can do more defensively, and so if this game is played first team to 100, you might give BYU the advantage, but if Alabama can, I don't want to say drag, but if they can bring this game into the 80s, I would give Alabama the advantage there. I think that Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, we've seen a good NCAA tournament so far from Cliff Amori. I think that group against Yegor Dimon, Richie Saunders, Keba Keita, it's going to be such a fun matchup. Kevin Young and Nate Oates, of course, two of the premier coaches across all of basketball. Both guys who have some interest across multiple levels, who, of course, have become some of the top college basketball coaches, but that NBA teams also have had on their radar for quite a while now. So I lean Alabama in this matchup. I think that they have the higher ceiling. We've seen them in the biggest of games before. We've seen them be inconsistent in those games. They've gotten big results and they have fallen on their face a few times. I think that they pull this one out, though. I think that BYU just doesn't quite have as much dynamic impact on that roster as Alabama. And so we set up a Duke versus Alabama Elite Eight where I would again roll with Duke. I'm not sure that they have the perimeter stopper on Alabama. I would say Mo Diabate is their best bet, but that then requires him to make some offensive impact if he's going to stay out on the floor. This would be an opportunity, I will say. If you're Alabama and you want a reason for why you could beat Duke, I would say that this could be the Herb Jones-esque breakout moment for Mo Diabate. If he's going to make it, this is a golden opportunity. You go out there, you play strong defense, you make an impact on that side, and show that you can do something on offense, that you can be useful on both ends of the floor out there, and it unlocks a whole new world for this Alabama team, which, again, I cannot stress this enough. This Alabama team, they can win the game. They just haven't every time. They've got everything they need to do it. You just kind of raise your eyebrow and say, will they? So that's where we are in that matchup. Just leaning Duke, but by no means is that written in pen. I think this Alabama team has what it takes to win that matchup. We go down to the Midwest in Indianapolis, where my friend Nick Schultz, who joins the show every preseason to break stuff down with us, he will be there providing you live coverage for On 3. Houston and Purdue is on the top of this bracket, and I like Houston to advance. I think that they've got everything rolling here for them. It feels like, and it has felt like for a little while, this might be the Houston team that just has everything it takes. Milos Uzan has gotten hot at the right time. And you look at that next to Emmanuel Sharp and LJ Cryer in the backcourt. You look at what they have with veteran leadership in the front court. And this Houston team just looks like it is clicking, that they are rolling through things. And on paper, they have the big advantage here against Purdue. If you're Purdue, though, you're looking for that insight. You're looking for how can we get it done? I will say, the way that you get it done is you rely on the veterans. You rely on Braden Smith, who has been in this big moment. You rely on Trey Kaufman-Wren, who has been in this moment. Fletcher Lawyer has been here before. Those guys have seen the biggest moments that college basketball has to offer, and they have performed in those moments. So you need those guys to lead you into this matchup and have their experience show up on the court, where some of these Houston players have not necessarily played for the same stakes. They have been in these big moments before, don't get me wrong, but Houston has not broken through in the same way. And then here we go to the bottom. This is the matchup of the round of 16, the Sweet 16 here. It is Kentucky against Tennessee. You can't get better than that. An SEC matchup between two rivals who it is tough to predict the results of their regular season games, much less what they will do in the NCAA tournament. I have seen an overwhelming majority pick Tennessee, and it's a little bit head-scratching for me because this is a Tennessee team that has had some troubles with Kentucky and with teams that want to play with the offensive style of Kentucky. Tennessee, don't get me wrong, they've got everything it takes. They've got Ziegler and Meshack locking it up on the defensive end. They've got Chaz Lanier on offense, who has been that perfect scoring punch that they need. The way that Rick Barnes wants his team, and it is very clear over these past couple of years, he wants one offensive juggernaut and a bunch of guys who play solid defense. That's what he's looking for, and that is what he has this season. And so it is not beyond the realm of possibilities here for Tennessee to have a big performance and get this win. But I look at Kentucky and I say Lamont Butler with another week of health, Amari Williams down low, the shooters that they have, I'm not going to pick against them. I'm going with Kentucky in this one. I think they can make a run to the Elite Eight in year one under Mark Pope. And I think that that is about as picture perfect of a start to his tenure as you could have. A guy who all the critics, and I'll put myself in there, you know, when I gave out the coaching grade, the low grade was not necessarily in response to Mark Pope himself, but the search that took place, the public no's that they received. But still, I definitely wrote about the questions that he had. That he was a coach who had never won an NCAA tournament game. And you just ran off Calipari for not winning NCAA tournament games. Well, now he has 2 wins under his belt. He can get a third one here that would be huge. A win over a rival, an NCAA tournament win, a win in the second weekend, a win that takes you just one game away from a potential Final Four. So much on the line there for Kentucky. And I think it would just send their fans over the moon for year one under Pope. And now we look at this Elite Eight matchup, potential Elite Eight matchup of Houston and Kentucky. And I do think that Houston has the advantage here. I think that they are a lot like Tennessee. I think that they're just a level above Tennessee in what they offer. And so I am going to roll with Houston to get through this one. This could be a really tough physical group as well here. I think we're going to see different styles of play in different parts of the country here as we watch these games. I think that it is going to be in the East, out in Newark, we're going to see an offensive showdown. Like it could be high scoring affairs in all of those games. And I think in the Midwest, we might see some defense played. Now, Kentucky can play offense for sure. But you've got some real defensive stalwarts there that you're going to have to go through. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch. So that would set us up for a Final Four of Auburn, Florida, Duke, and Houston. Same Final Four that I rolled with entering here. The only 2 changes to the Elite Eight that we're making are Arkansas and Alabama. Those, of course, come as Wisconsin and St. John's already eliminated. So not changing my view on anyone who is still in the tournament. I like the same storylines that I liked coming into this. I think that they have held up well, and we will talk about them, good or bad, whatever the results are, however we fare. We will talk about those next Thursday right here on 3 True Values. Again, remember, tune in next Tuesday for a special coaching episode. Thank you once again for listening. We are coming up on the end of March, and we can smell the Final Four. It is so close. We have so much to talk about right here on 3 True Values. Please continue to tune in over the next few weeks.